How's it going, chasers? I hope you're having a kick-ass week. I am about to do a spot of distilling with apples. And I have a little tip to help people that are new to distilling, or specifically new to distilling fruit, to help make sure that the flavor from your ingredients actually ends up in the bottle. Make the most of your fruit ingredients. Let's get stuck in. I'm actually not going to be making a brandy today. I'm going to be trying to rescue a brandy today, but the process is going to work just the same. This is a brandy with berries, strawberries, and guava in it, and it was tasting pretty damn good. It's been aging on a tiny bit of wood for about a year. Unfortunately, before I went off to Cairns, I tasted this and I didn't close the lid properly, and lo and behold, the ABV has dropped pretty drastically to the point where I don't think it's going to make it as is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this to illustrate the point, and I wouldn't suggest you doing this at home if you're trying to rescue a brandy, but I'm actually going to add some heads back into this to make it a little bit more realistic. So that is 1 litre. For the sake of clarity, what I'm going to do is distill this to raise the ABV back up, put it back into here to bump the ABV of this back up, to try and save the brandy. That is separate to what I'm doing in terms of showing you, what's going on with brandy and fruit flavors in brandy. For the first part, in terms of rescuing this, there's no way I would do this, but I'm actually going to add a small amount of heads back in here. We're going to do, let's say, a little over 200 mils. That sounds about right. This is a apple brandy heads, by the way, team. I can't even remember when I made that, and I can't remember why I saved it, but I'm glad I did. That's 230 mils. Feels about right for this size batch. If you're trying to rescue this, don't add the heads back in. I'm just doing it to make this a little bit more realistic as a brandy. All right, so let's get this into the still. Because we're distilling this again, I'm going to lose a bit of flavor doing this. It's kind of necessary to rescue the spirit. But because of that, I think I may as well add some more flavor in. And tasting that spirit before I ruined it, I think a little bit of apple would pair really nicely. So I'm just going to add some apple into the spirit before we distill it. Kind of like a botanical in a gin. This is nothing new. People do this all the time for brandies. They'll add fresh fruit back in after it has, they'll mash and ferment apples, but add more apple into the still or into the vapor path. Pretty common thing to do. This isn't the tip. We are up to temperature 10. The still is running. We got first drips coming out. This is where let's do it anyway. I was going to say I wasn't going to bother taking quote unquote 4 shots, but why not? We need to run out through our heads at the moment to get down to the alcohol that we want to keep. That smells pretty good. Not getting a whole lot of that fresh apple flavor yet. I think it's mostly the apple flavor from this. But I am fairly certain that's going to change pretty dang quickly. Yeah, okay. So we're starting to get the appley, the fresh, juicy, unfermented apple flavor coming off the still now. It's not that strong yet, to be perfectly honest with you. I expect that to build. But yeah, that kind of, the tangy apple skin flavor is what's showing up right now, which I do not smell or taste in this at all. So our apples in there are doing something. That's a good thing. We want them to be giving us flavor. Let's settle in, and I will let you know when we're getting close to making the cuts from heads to hearts. All right, that's starting to clean up quite nicely now. And there's still a little bit of apple flavor going on in there, but honestly not as much and not as intense as it was about halfway through those heads. So let's turn the still off for a second. For those of you that have made any form of whiskey, you probably already know that you're going to be put into a slightly strange artistic decision-making process where you're trying to decide how much grain flavor you want to sort of wrestle out of the still versus how far you want to push into tails. A lot of the grain flavors come across at the end of the run. In my experience, and a lot of other people's experience, most fruit flavors are the complete opposite. They come off at the beginning of the run. They're quite volatile. They are chemicals that have a lower boiling point. They want to evaporate quicker. So the issue you run into is not how much tails versus how much fruit flavor. It is how much heads versus how much fruit flavor. And if you're fermenting the fruit, that's just kind of the way it is. It comes down to a decision between, I guess, mouthfeel and kind of alcohol quality, I guess you could call it, versus how much of the fruit flavor you want to go through into the final product. But I'm not doing that, right? Well, I kind of am because it's brandy in the still. But we added fruit in as well. Here's the heads I've collected so far, less the 4 shots. And I can smell apple in this. Fresh apple. Apple flavor that wasn't going to be in there if I hadn't have added that fresh apple into the still. We're going to get rid of this. We're not going to drink it. Maybe we'll reuse it later, but it's not going into the final product now, right? And if a good part of the flavor coming from the apple is in this glass and not making it into the bottle, it's kind of a waste, right? So I guess the obvious next step to this, or the thing that probably is popping straight into your mind is, why don't we just put the fruit in later? And a lot of people do that. That is the whole point of this video. I know I've mentioned it in the past, but I don't think I've ever actually made a video specifically talking about it. My bad, guys. I'm sorry. Thank you to the Patreon that brought this up as a question for reminding me to do so. There's a whole bunch of different ways you can go about this, some of which involve extra equipment. I'm guessing maybe a lot of you have heard of shooting the thumper. Bearded and Board did a video on this a while ago, and I found it really interesting. It's not something I've actually tried, and to be honest, it's the #1 reason why I actually want to get a thumper and give it a nudge. But the idea is that you would have a valve like this sitting on top of your thumper in the closed position until you finish collecting heads off the other end. You open the valve up, and you dump a liquid into the thumper that is a maceration of apple or apple juice, or you get the idea, right? You close it back off, and you go on your merry way. Of course, it doesn't have to be a liquid. I have seen some people using what home brewers would call a hop dropper. I think the technical name for it is something like this, where you pack it full of, in their case, hops. In our case, might be fruit, could be berries, apples, peaches, whatever you want it to be. Once you've collected all the heads, you would open the big ass ball valve up, drop all of the fruit into the still or into the thumper or wherever it's going in your specific situation, close the ball valve back up again and carry on. Of course, you could do it in the vapor path as well with a botanical basket, kind of like this one, which I haven't used yet, and it has sat getting dirty in the corner, and I feel really stink about that because it's kind of a cool piece of equipment. But the idea is this would sit on top of a column still with a reflux condenser underneath it. Once you collected all the heads off, you would completely crank the reflux condenser up to send 100% of the vapor back down, meaning you can pop the lid off this, pull the basket out, fill it up with whatever you want, pop it back in, pop the lid on, ease up on the reflux condenser and go on your merry way once again. And of course, you could just turn the still off, wait for a little while so it's not quite so hot, pop the top off, throw some stuff in and pop the lid back on. Now, with my bigger stills, I'm kind of loath to do this because most of them involve a fair amount of heavy metal that gets really freaking hot. On a larger still that's going to piss out a bunch of vapor everywhere as soon as I crack the lid. It just doesn't feel so good. I don't like doing it so much, but this little guy has an insulated lid, and I have my fruit here ready to go in a bowl, so that's going to be nice and quick. And I'm a lot less stressed out about a bunch of vapor going everywhere. I mean, it's still something to be careful about. Don't take this lightly. Obviously, you know, make sure there's nothing around that could ignite it. Make sure you're in a well-ventilated area, so on and so forth. But I feel, you know, the idea of doing this isn't terrifying to me. So I'm gonna give this a little shake and I'm gonna let it sit for about 20 minutes just to infuse the apple. Some of you probably noticed that I used a very pathetic amount of apple going into the still at the beginning. I knew that was gonna be kind of sacrificial apple in this case. Let's let it sit for a little bit. We'll turn the still back on again and hopefully we get a whole bunch more apple flavor coming through the hearts this time instead of the heads. So we're back up and running after about a half-hour maceration, and pleased to say that there's lots of apple aroma and lots of apple flavor coming through. I should clarify a little bit. Anytime I do anything like this with apple, the flavor's always not that bold. It's quite delicate. You have to go looking for it a little bit. For me, personally, I think it may be the way I taste. So the fact that I can like easily tell there's apple in here means there's lots of apple flavor. It's not an apple bomb by any means at all. It also raises the question that, yeah, of course, I added heads back into this. I could have just added apple and distilled it. It's kind of to illustrate the point. But that is also the reason that, you know, when we make gin, for example, we use a vodka that's already had really good cuts made on it. There's no heads in there. So as soon as we start getting into botanical flavor, that is going into the bottle at the end of the day. It doesn't have to be just gin. You can do that with anything. If I was going to make a brandy, for example, and add a whole bunch more fresh apple into the still, I could choose to double distill, yes, but actually make some cuts on the first go round. I could triple distill it and then add a whole lot of apple in on the last run. It gives you a whole bunch of options. I just wanted to make this video to highlight to those of you that hadn't thought about this or hadn't run into this or hadn't just had the opportunity to stumble on it yourself or think about it yourself. That is a really good way to make sure that the flavor that is in here that we're putting into or using in our ingredients actually ends up in the bottle. All right, let me run this out and we can doctor where have I put my brandy? Let me go find my brandy. We'll run this out, we'll put them back together and check the ABV. All right, team, let's whack this in here. And I need to take an ABV reading. My little fancy U-bend what's a jigger is broken. So I need and I have just realized that I spent a little bit too much time talking to you guys and thinking about the whole apple thing and not enough time thinking about the numbers of how this was going to work. It was a little bit under 40% and now it's 41%. I probably should have distilled twice as much. I don't think in good faith, like, I don't want to keep aging it at 40%. So if this tastes like not terrible as is, I think I'll probably just bottle it, to be honest. Huh, you know what? I'm gonna bottle it. So here's the deal, guys. This was Feijoa blueberry and strawberry guava. And when the ABV dropped, it got a little bit pungent. It's kind of like the strawberry guava took over a little bit too much. It has been sitting on oak for a while, so it's sort of smoothed out nicely in terms of the alcohol. But the strawberry guava was tasting almost pungent. And I think just that little tiny boost in, well, it's not that it was bad, but I knew that I couldn't just keep aging it, right? But I think the little boost in ABV has brightened it up a little bit, and the more fresh apple flavor is almost coming across, it's almost tropical, which has lifted that slightly pungent flavor a fair bit. So yeah, I'm just gonna bottle this. I'll be real with you, team. That's exactly what I'm gonna do as soon as I say goodbye to you. See you later, team. We'll catch you next time. Bye.